Hey, folks, this is Mark Divine. Welcome back to the Unbeatable Mind podcast. So stoked to have you here today. Super appreciate your time, your attention, and your support. Please refer these podcasts to other people. Just forward it or send them the link to the channel of whatever station that you listen to it on. That's very helpful. And it's also helpful if you rate it. So go rate it on iTunes or Spotify. That'd be very helpful to other people to find the podcast. I mentioned recently that we also launched a wickedly cool and effective 30-day course. It's really a condensation of all the wisdom that we put into our year-long foundation course, and we dole it out over 15 minutes a day for 30 days, where you get a video from me and then some contemplation, box breathing, visualization, micro goal setting, those types of things into a little journaling exercise. This course is extraordinary. We've got so much great feedback. A lot of people who are just personal development junkies have said it is bar none the best program they've ever seen. So go check it out for yourself. It literally is free if you don't want to keep it, but I guarantee you're going to want to keep it and you're going to want to continue on with us. Check it out at unbeatablemindcom/challenge, unbeatablemindcom/challenge. You won't be disappointed. And thanks to all of our sponsors today. I'm super stoked to talk to my friend, Lisa Tamati. Lisa and I did a podcast on her podcast a little while ago, which is called, Lisa, help me out here.
Pushing the limits.
Pushing the limits, right? And we had so much fun. Like we have like kindred spirit here. Lisa is a crazy endurance and adventure athlete. She's an author. She's written 3 books, Relentless, her most recent one, which is her journey with her mom, subtitled How a Mother and a Daughter Defied the Odds, is her journey to help her mom heal from a stroke, pretty devastating stroke. Amazing. We're going to talk about that. Her other ones are really about her passion for endurance running. It's called Running Hot and Running to Extreme. She's a motivational speaker, a mindset coach. She does it all. And she's got a great attitude, a great sense of humor. And we're going to learn a lot from her. So Lisa, thanks for joining me today. I know you just woke up. You're down in New Zealand, right? Or are you in Australia?
No, I'm in New Zealand. So I'm at the furthest end of the earth. We've just woken up. So yeah, really excited to talk to you today, Mark. And
yeah, likewise.
Hopefully we're going to have a great conversation.
I just had dinner last night with some friends who live in New Zealand, and they're telling me just how draconian the country's been with its COVID lockdowns.
Oh yeah.
Oh my God. They've literally sequestered themselves 3 times for 14 days. Just because they have to do international travel as part of their business. And every time they do it, they're in lockdown in a hotel and, they get checked on. I mean, they can't do anything. They get like one window of time where they get to walk around, and fascinating.
Yeah, it's been pretty harsh, but because we're an island, we've been able to keep the COVID out of the country. So, we've had a few cases, but we've managed to, through those draconian sort of efforts, and we've been able to keep the whole thing under control. So we've just opened up to Australia, which is awesome because we have lots of family and friends over there. So
have they been vaccinating folks down there?
They've just started that rollout recently, so maybe in the last 2 months, and it's sort of just ramping up now. But yeah, it's a long haul.
Yeah. Okay. Well, sorry you've had to deal with that. I guess we're not alone, right?
Well, I can't, I'd love to fly over and see you in person and do this in person, but I'll be stuck in a hotel for 2 weeks if I do.
Well, I think you're going to want to come to one of our 50-hour SEALFIT events. So you'll probably end up flying over here when you can.
Oh, that would be amazing.
That would be right up your lane, Coral Camp. So let's talk about how and why you got into running. Like, what were you running toward or from, and what was that like for you?
You're on the money already. Yeah. So yeah, I didn't grow up being a very good runner. In fact, I was an asthmatic, a severe asthmatic as a child, so in and out of hospital. Didn't have a very good VO2 max, and my lung capacity was, 3.5 liter lung capacity. So I was never going to be an Olympic runner.
That's about like half of what, or maybe a quarter of what endurance athletes typically have, right?
Yeah. So I had not from the get-go, from a genetic perspective and health perspective, it wasn't really logical that I'd go into running. But one of the things that I found was that running long, as opposed to running short, fast races, because I wasn't fast, right? I just didn't have that VO2 max capability, but I had a strong mind. And that sort of, did me well over the years. And I actually got into it because I was in my early 20s. I was with a young guy from Austria, and we were in a relationship, and he was an extremely amazing athlete, and he sort of opened my eyes to the world of traveling. And we traveled through like 25 countries on bicycles, and we climbed mountains and trekked and did all that sort of good stuff. And that sort of opened my mind to what I was capable of. Unfortunately, the relationship was not so beneficial, shall we say, call it what it was. It was a abusive relationship.
Oh, that's
and so he was very much, and that's a long time ago, and I'm sure he's changed nowadays, but it was not a healthy relationship, and it was one where I was constantly being put down and told I was useless. And I sort of, when I look at buds training and stuff that you guys go through, I was like, yeah, it's similar. in
You've
some
been
ways.
through your own buds training, yeah.
Went through a type of buds training in my own way, because we were pushing the limits physically, and he was always pushing me beyond what I was capable of at the time, sort of. And then you were constantly told that you were useless.
How long was that
hopeless.
Relationship? So where I'm getting is how much of an impact did this relationship and the abuse have on you in terms of your motivation?
Massive. So five years we were together.
Yeah.
And in those formative years where you're just getting out of your parents' home and then into your adult life, and it was the first time that I'd been overseas and all that sort of stuff. And we lived in Austria, and so being over there, I was isolated from family, friends, and I was in a new culture. I couldn't speak the language. I had to learn all that pretty quickly. And so you're sort of under the control, for the want of a better word, of someone else and their culture. And so, it was diving deep into that. And over time, your confidence and self-esteem gets eroded away when you're exposed to constant negativity, when you're around people, some person that's telling you're useless and you can't do things and so on. So you think that you're not capable of very much. But I was desperately trying to prove that I was cool and tough and so on. And so this came to a head, and I was doing a crossing of the Libyan Desert, which was a 4-person expedition that we did through a military barred area. So it was illegal what we did. This was led by a Yugoslavian, back then Yugoslavia, survival expert. And we had to cover 250 kilometers in this time period where we had to carry everything on our backs. So that meant all the water supply. So we only had, we took 20 liters of water each, which was all we could carry, because we had to carry all our gear as well. So that meant a 2-liter water ration a day in a desert that's 40 plus degrees when you're trying to cover 45 kilometers. And so I had a backpack that was 35 kilograms. The guys had a little bit more than that. And
what's
we
that
had
in
to
pounds, by the way? Like 70 something?
Like 90 pounds or something like that. Yeah, it's like 2.2. 2.2. So yeah, about 80, 90 pounds, something bloody heavy. Anyway, it was about 2/3 of my body weight. So, and you got this deprivation of water. And I just crossed the Arabian Desert the week before, so I was pretty fatigued. it wasn't
Now,
quite as
what, stop
extreme.
there. Why would you do these two events so close to each other? Seems like you'd need months to recover from just hiking across or running across the Arabian Desert, by the way.
So the Arabian Desert, this was a trek, this wasn't running.
Okay.
This was 150K and it wasn't as extreme, and it was a sort of preparation. So we were down in Egypt anyway. And so we did the Arabian Desert. The guy who was organizing this, he was taking a group through there, and that was the way he was financing it, if that makes sense. So then we went up to the Libyan desert, just the four of us. So there was
and what would have happened if you stumbled upon like a military patrol? They would have arrested you or taken you to custody, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And so we had to, we left Cairo, we drove, 12 hours south from there, and then we came to this last oasis, if you like, and there's a big military base there, and we had to sort of wait till nightfall and try to disappear through, without getting seen. So scary, scary stuff. And then having the only 2 liters of water a day, that started to bite really, really quickly. And so what people are like in expeditions and stuff when they are under extreme duress. They can be very irritable, you can be very short, you can, you're not always on your best behavior. And so we ended up having a big, massive domestic in the middle of this Libyan desert crossing, right? So it's a funny story now to tell you, but it wasn't quite so funny then. We wanted to do a book about this crossing because it was the most beautiful desert you can possibly imagine. I've run lots of deserts, and this was the most beautiful place I'd ever been. There was like these limestone formations, and there was this coral growing out of the ground, sort of, that would be there because it was once covered by the ocean. And this was untouched. So the native people there had been through this, but no other people sort of had crossed this area, right? So it was a pretty special thing to do. And all we had was military maps from the US military. I don't know how we got it, don't ask. But they were pilot maps of the area. So we only had pilot maps because this is back in 1997, right? So this is a long time ago. It was before we had all the stuff we have now. And we were going to do a book. And so my partner was a photographer, and he wanted to take lots of photos. And Elvis, who was the leader of the expedition, and that was his real name, he said, well, you can take as many photos as you like, but you've got to keep up, and we've got to cover 45 kilometers a day, and that's non-negotiable. So yeah, if you're going to do that, you have to keep up. And the partner wanted me to help with the photography, setting up tripods, carrying gear, doing whatever. And I was just physically unable to do anything more than put one foot in front of the other because this was just on the limits anyway. And so he started having a go at me for that. And Elvis sort of turned around and said, hang on a minute, you can't treat her like that, and this was the first time in that 5-year relationship that somebody else had actually said to me, this is not okay the way you're treating her. Wow. And that was for me, like, really, this is not okay, because for me, that was my normal, that was my what I was used to. And so there ended up being this big alpha male fight between these two guys. And this culminated on day 4 with my partner in the middle of the day. So envisage, 40 plus degrees, you're severely dehydrated, like dehydration like you've never experienced. You're very irritable, you're very, this is dire. And your partner says, right, that's it, that's the end of the relationship, I'm leaving. And so he left, he packed up his backpack and he left me with the other two guys. He
just strolled off into the desert alone.
He strolled off into the desert. And at that stage, like, I was
sounds like a brilliant idea, right?
Well, I was worried, like, is he going to survive? Like, are we going to survive? Yeah. Because it was getting pretty, close to the edge. And he was very capable, but all it takes out there is one twisted ankle and you're up shit creek, basically. So anyway, I started to fall apart, start crying and being a girl, and then I thought, hang on a minute, I'm in the middle of the Libyan desert. I can't afford to fall apart right now. Right. I've got to pull my shit together and I've got to really, focus on the task at hand. And that was the first time that I really learned to compartmentalize my emotional state from the job I had to do, which ended up being a really good lesson to learn, because you can't just let go in a place like that. You've got to get, and you owe it to the other guys. And so the three of us then continued on, and it was a pretty brutal next few days where it was on the absolute limits of what we could endure. And cut a long story short, we did make it out. I remember coming into the next oasis after 7 days, we made it through. And I was completely and utterly, just exhausted. And you're coming into this oasis, and we had to wait for nightfall again because there was another military base that we had to get past into the main oasis. And I was like putting my last lolly that I'd saved in my mouth, and I'm looking up at the guard in the towers with his machine gun, and I'm thinking I should be shit scared right now, and I'm not. I just don't feel anything, Right. In fact, I wanted to turn around and go back out into the desert because I didn't want to face my life when I got back, because it was going to be one hell of a mess. So anyway, this is how I ended up getting through this desert, and this was a low point in my life, right? And it was a turning point in my life. I'd survived this incredible crossing through this amazing place. I'd lost a relationship, and I had to, it took me another 3 years to get out of that relationship completely, because it ended up being one hell of a mess. And
can I ask something about this? My experience or kind of understanding is, if you get yourself into a dysfunctional relationship, especially one that is abusive, and you don't recognize that it's abusive, it's because that showed up somewhere else in your life, typically parents, right? So was there conditions in your home that led you to, not recognize some of the same things?
So I grew up with absolutely amazing, wonderful parents. So no, I didn't have abuse as a child from my parents, but what I did have from my dad was that he was a real hard ass. He was a tough man, and he expected a lot. So while he was a loving father who was awesome and very engaged with his kids, he put a lot of pressure on us to perform. And he wanted me to represent New Zealand in sport. He wanted me to be a top athlete, a top career woman, a top everything. That was, he wanted the best for me in my life. But that created this, because I was a very, very sensitive kid, it created this pressure in me to want to please my dad, right? I wanted to prove that I was cool and tough. And he valued mental and physical toughness. So he grew up really hard himself. He'd grown up sort of, didn't even own a pair of shoes until he went to high school. He grew up as one of 8 children, dirt poor. And it was, fight or, go under sort of a life. And so he wanted us to have everything that he didn't have. But the way he brought that across was that he wanted us to perform. So when I got into a relationship, of course, I searched out somebody who was as hard and as tough as he was in a way, whereas the redeeming side of my father was that he was just, loyal and dedicated and a wonderful dad as well. So yes, there were elements of that.
You couldn't see the dark side in this guy. No. And you transferred the need to please and to want to make him proud. Let me get your dad proud. You transferred that onto this guy, and then that kind of blinded you to the abuse.
Very much so. Yep, you're on the money.
Wow, there. I think I could be a therapist. What do you think?
Yeah, I think you could be too. Yeah, you're onto it. And now looking back at it, it's easy to see that. It's not so easy when you're in the middle of it. Of course, you just surviving and doing what you do. And but so back to the story, that was the turning point where I said, and it took me a long time to get out of that relationship because it became even more abusive and more dangerous and so on. I eventually did though. And when I did, I was like, and nobody is going to treat me like that again. and I am not going to be that person ever again. And I'm going to, and this is where I started to get into ultra marathon running, because it took me 2 years to physically recover from the Arabian Desert. Like I did massive damage to my kidneys, and you can imagine what the dehydration. I had no, my nerves and all my shoulders and stuff were numb. I had no feeling. I had a scoliosis in the spine because of the weight. You know, there was a lot of things that were going on, and of course mentally I was in a bad way. And
how old
so
were
it
you
took
then?
me. I was 27.
Okay.
27.
Wow.
So I got into this late, but then I was reading a couple of years later, about this race in Morocco called the Marathon des Sables, which is a famous ultra marathon. And it was 240 Ks, and it was across the Moroccan Sahara, and you had 9 liters of water a day, and you had doctors and you had support. And I'm like, and it's been touted back then as the toughest race on earth.
It sounds probably pretty easy compared to Libya.
I'm like, I reckon I could do that. You know, that was my comparison, because the distance and things were comparable. And so I started to train for this race and try to get sponsors and things to get down to this race. And I did. And I went and I hadn't even run a marathon at that point, right? I've never done it physically.
You went from 0 to 240 miles.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's
exactly
not necessarily the prescription that I would say that I would recommend most people do, but it worked for me.
but I had been doing lots of trekking, and I had done all that sport before. So while I hadn't been a runner per se, I had done a lot of endurance sport, if you like. So I went down there and I did this event, and I was surrounded by like 700 people, and you've got it's like a military camp moving every day. It's like 700 runners, and you got all these army trucks, and it was just super exciting. And I was just like buzzing out, and this is amazing, and then you're surrounded by positive, amazing people who are willing you on. And, you had your teammates in your tent. You had about 7 or 8 guys in your tent, right? And you're just looking after each other, and people were so positive, and they were patting you on the back. And I was just sucking that up because I needed that, because I was just so down on who I was, right? So when people are telling you you're amazing, bless you, you're amazing, and what you're doing is really awesome, that just really started to rebuild me. That's great. So I did that race, and I was just like, this is awesome. And I did really well at it. I ended up at the top 10 of women, and which was pretty good for a first timer. Yeah. And I'm like, hang on a second, I'm pretty good at this. I'm going to keep going. So then I just did one after the other, and the rest is sort of history. 25 years later, 140 ultra marathons later, 70,000 kilometers.
I was just going to ask how far you've run. 70,000 kilometers.
Yeah. It's like 2.5 times around the equator equivalent. That's in training and events and stuff. But so
this is incredible. I mean, I've interviewed some extreme athletes, and I interviewed a guy recently who ran across the United States doing a marathon every day. I think it was 121 marathons. And he finished up with the New York Marathon. And it just fascinates me because it's just so much time alone in your head. Running, even though you have support teams and all that, it's a very, very solitary endeavor. And, I remember as a competitive swimmer, I could handle, an hour or 2 of swimming alone in the water, but I would probably go bonkers if I was alone for 18 hours, just trotting through the desert.
Yeah, you got.
So what happens? Like, what's your mind doing? I know this will lead into the discussion on resiliency and mental toughness, but like, what is your mind? What does Lisa's mind do when you're really in these long endurance races, and what happens when you really start to struggle? How do you pull yourself out, and how do you maintain kind of a relaxed flow state, which is certainly the holy grail, where hours can slip by when.
That flow state thing, I've got Stephen Kotler coming on the show shortly. He's awesome. Yeah. And I didn't I would occasionally get into that flow state, but not as often as I would have liked. You know, like people sometimes envisage that you get into the state and you're in this sort of Zen sort of meditative state and you're just cruising along, and that certainly happens, but it's not, you don't stay there the whole time.
Right.
And it's definitely a battle of will and overcoming obstacles. And you have to have a really strong why, I think, is really, really important. And at the beginning, my why was pretty obvious. I was trying to prove to certain people that I wasn't useless and weak, and I had a lot to regenerate, you know, and to try to regenerate who I was and build my confidence and my self-esteem. So that was a very, very strong why. So I was willing to go to whatever pain came my way to not be considered useless, which is what I was fighting against inside myself. Even though that person was out of my life, I was still fighting that demon, if you like, in my
so in those
myself.
years, in that phase, what was your mental dialogue?
Yeah, there was a lot of like, you just don't, you know, like if you felt like quitting, which was pretty much every minute of every hour, you'd be having these conversations. So you can't let that person beat you. Like, I'll give you an example. So I did the Badwater Ultra Marathon, which is a famous race in the States that you probably know about, through Death Valley, which is the hottest race on earth, right? And it's 135 miles. And it took me years and years to qualify for that event and to have enough experience. And the reason I wanted to specifically do that race was that the boyfriend back then, he had cycled through Death Valley in the middle of summer, and he'd always like been, you know, telling me how amazing it was because he cycled through Death Valley in the middle of summer. And so in the back of my head, when I knew that there was this ultra marathon where they ran through Death Valley in the middle of summer, I'm like, that's my holy grail, because if I do that, then I've beaten that demon in my mind that was him, you know, if that makes sense. Yeah. So it took me 13 years to get there. But I did. I ran through Death Valley. I did it twice, actually, through in the middle of summer. And when I did that, that was like closure. That was like, and I am not useless.
Right. and you needed a new why too, right?
I needed a new why. And then my why changed. Really, after that race, it became more about, okay, I've got this skill that I've developed, this talent for this sort of stuff. How can I actually use it to help other people? So that then turned into things like raising money for charity. I ran through New Zealand, 2,250 kilometers, raising money for kids and canteen, and I've done lots of, you know, charity sort of events. And then also became a part of my you know, you're then passing on the knowledge, you're coaching, like you do, you know, you're sharing, you're teaching, and you're giving the wins from all of this, because there is so much that you learn when you're doing this that you can then take into your daily life, your business life, your career, your family life, all of these skills. Because running from A to B in an artificial race is just a man-made construct that we've just, you know, it has no point really. We're not going to war to defend our country. We're just doing this stupid random thing, really.
Well, yeah, we do those things for a reason, to challenge ourselves. And like you said, because we can, you know, you know, like, why would we want to climb Everest? Yeah. And, you know, I remember someone asking or reading about Edmund Hillary being asked that. And he said, well, because it's there.
Yeah, exactly. My fellow Kiwi, he's, you know, a true legend. And it is because we want, I think people in past, you know, centuries were warriors or explorers or pioneers in some way. So they had their physical job to do. They were there pushing the limits every day, sort of thing, just to survive.
So they didn't have this need to experience, you know, the physical hardship and push the body to the edge, because they were actually doing it to survive and to do their living. Yeah. So we have a pretty comfortable lifestyle, and yet something in our spirit says, you know what, we need to be challenged. Yeah. And if you hide from that challenge, then you live a life that's even, you know, the suffering of the challenge pales in comparison to the suffering
That's what I
of not going to
believe.
the challenge. Yeah.
That is so true. You pay the price one way or the other.
Correct.
And if you learn the discipline of training, of staying fit and looking after your health and being in that preventative sort of mindset, you're going to save a hell of a lot of suffering on the other end.
Right.
That where you see people go through, we'll get into the story with my mum shortly, horrible things.
Right.
And you think how that could have been avoided if they had eaten better, trained better, and my God, like I'm going to keep running,
Right.
because I don't want to go
if
through
it's
that.
not a physical disease that comes from not challenging yourself, there's that issue of just living that quiet desperation of not discovering who you are and what you're capable of, and also not facing the demons like you did. Because one of the best way to heal emotionally is to go deep into some transformational challenge like this and to face the demons that come up time and time and time again.
Yep.
And you can't hide from them in an ultra race. They're staring you. They're running right alongside of you. Right?
There's no hiding. And like your true self comes out and your true problems come out, and it's very cathartic. I remember running through that, Moroccan desert the second time I did it and just bawling my eyes out for this 84-kilometer stage that we were doing. It's just running along crying. It was just such a cathartic experience. You're
Right.
just dealing with you're having these conversations in your head. You're sorting stuff out. And it's still very much a mental health thing for me today, is when I get out and I go for my run, which is no longer the stupidly long distance. I've retired from it, the ultra marathon, and I'll tell you about why later. But it's still my mental health. I go out there, I'm alone in my head. I can sort through the shit of the day. I can reorganize things in my brain. And it is a type of meditation, it is a type of mental health and stability. And it gets that energy out. Like I have a lot of adrenaline. I know, like I study genetics and stuff, and I have an inordinate amount of adrenaline in my body. That means I have a lot of stress hormones, a lot of cortisol, a lot of adrenaline. I need to move. I need to move all day, pretty much.
I think I'm like
that's
that
where I find it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that I want to talk about what you learned about resiliency and grit, but you mentioned something that endurance training like that, or endurance sports, do have a meditative effect, and I think it's similar to mindfulness. Right. There's different types of meditation. I teach that in Unbeatable Mind. We talked about that on your podcast, that have different effects on your brain. Will train you different ways. But from my experience with long distance running and swimming and whatnot, was a mindfulness, very similar to mindfulness meditation, where that you are able to kind of create a separation between yourself and your thoughts. And then you get to examine those thoughts as they come up time and time and time again. And I think that's really valuable. Because if you're just merged with your thoughts, you will quit. Right? If the part of you that comes up says, I can't do this sucks, I'm not worthy, and you believe it, you haven't created the separation, you are those thoughts, you're toast.
Yeah.
But when you train this way, and slowly you begin to recognize that if I just deny those thoughts their power, it starts to diminish. And then anytime they come up because of a subconscious pattern, you can smack them in the face and tell them to go away, and then, develop the counter argument, which is, I am worthy. Actually, I've got this. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm not.
And it takes
I'm
time.
not that. It takes time.
Yeah. And it's understanding also your really strong why that you're doing it, so that you have, like when I was doing long races and I'd get to the point where I'm, at the end of my tether and I feel like I can't even take another step. And then I would ask myself, I'd spin these fantasies out of my head. Like, if you just crashed in the jungle in an airplane and your mother's life depended on it, you getting help, and you have to run now another 200 miles or something, are you going to quit? Those are the questions that I'd ask myself. And if I could say, no, of course I wouldn't quit because of my mum, and then I would say, right, well, get your ass up off the ground, because there is a way to keep moving forward. You just have to take the next step. And that's these little mind games that you're playing with yourself to trick yourself to keep going and pull out the stops, because when you're doing these types of things, you are pulling out the stops, and you don't want to live in that space every day of, your life, because you'll break yourself. But there are times in life where you have to be able to pull out the stops and to be able to carry on and not quit when it really counts. And those are the times you want to be able to tap into that ability when the proverbial hits the fan, you know that you'll step up. And the more you do that, the stronger that you become, the more confident, the more self-esteem you develop, the more, you feel like you can rely on yourself, and that you are going to when it really counts, you'll be there, and that's, I think, really important.
You're pointing to is this fact that grit and resiliency are things that you practice. You become them. It's not something you just happen to have. You practice it by not quitting, and then not quitting again, and then not quitting again, getting stronger every time. In the SEALs, we were taught that, when we hit that wall moment, when we just couldn't go another step, we actually had about 40% more energy. And so just to, but we had our teammates kind of beside us to support us. Right. And so if you're on a solitary journey, those teammates, it has to be your inner guide, your higher self, right? That, your mom or your why becomes your teammate.
Yeah.
Right. And then you can even create, an inner team, just like like in some visualization training, you develop like an internal board of directors or, internal guides, and you can talk to them. Right. And they're there, they take on kind of a life for you. Well, one of the things that we teach in SEALFIT is to create your inner team, like the teammates in your mind, who are there to support you and pick you up when you fall down, and you're there to support them, and they're running right alongside you.
Oh, I love that analogy. Actually, I've never thought of it like that, but it's like, it's almost like, I like asking the universe and my loved ones on the other side, because I believe that they carry on. For help. I'm in dire straits.
So they're similar. They're your inner team, right?
They're my inner team. They're the ones that I need some help over here.
Well, what's interesting too about this concept of 40% more is that, the first time, let's say, using my example, you're at Buds and you hit the wall, and instructor comes up and says, you're capable. They used to tell us 20 times more. So I use that in my training. You're capable 20 times more, which, the first 20x is, let's relate that. Maybe you have 40% more energy than you thought you had. So all you need is either an internal nudge to say, screw it, I'm not quitting. I'm capable of 20 times more. Let's go. And then you find that you have 40% more energy, and you complete whatever it is you're completing, and you're stronger.
Yep.
The next time you do it, you don't get to that inflection point at the same point as you did the first time. It comes to you 40% later. Right. And so then when you've already, right. And you still have 40% more after that. And then you see where I'm going. And then the next time it comes to you yet again, 40% later than the second time. And you still have 40% more after that. And in this way, you end up with like geometric growth or capacity building, right?
Yeah.
By just ratcheting up these wins, recognizing that you're capable of 20 times more. And then when you hit that limit, it's 20 times more, 20 times more, or 40% more, 40% more, 40% more. Either way, it's kind of a metaphor. It's going to be different every time and different for every person. But when you develop a strong why, and you can internally guide yourself to recognize that you're not that thought of quitting, you're not that thought of shame or unworthiness or whatever form it takes, you're not your demons. What we say is you stare down that wolf of fear. It's just me.
You got it behind it.
Staring down my wolf of fear. And when you do that and you break through, suddenly you have this surge of energy.
Yep.
And there's that 40%. And then you just keep, it's like compounding. You compound grit.
Yep.
Through this way.
And you also start to understand how it all works, because at the first time you hit something, a wall, you think that that's it, and then you just don't understand that actually you can suffer longer, you can go harder, you can push further. And then there's been times, Mark, when I've actually failed. Mm-hmm. And when I've dissected afterwards, I mean, a couple of times where like I was running 333 Ks across Niger, which is like deep in the Sahara, in a race, and I ended up with food poisoning. Mm-hmm. And I had to pull out after 222 Ks with severe food poisoning. And to top it all off, my marriage at the time. I was married to another Austrian, another one, and we were getting a week before he'd asked me for a divorce, and so I'm facing this biggest race, the longest race I've ever done, most dangerous country. Like, it's not, not a great place to be running anyway. And then I got food poisoning an hour into the race, because we'd had this goat stew the night before, and there were only 17 runners, so we were spread for miles. You're on your own, you're in the middle of the Sahara, you're vomiting, you've got severe diarrhea, and you're passing out. And I failed at the 222k mark. And I say failed because, like, there are times, like, I beat myself up for that failure for many years afterwards. And then I thought, hang on a minute, now you're being a bit ridiculous,
Right.
Because you weren't in a war, you were in a race. It was getting to the point where you could die if you carried on, and that's just stupid to continue there. Stop beating yourself up.
Mm-hmm.
And so sometimes the times when I've failed, other times I've failed when I've gone into something too cocky, I've got this because it's only a 50K or something, and I can do that in my sleep, and then I've fallen on my ass. Mm-hmm. Because I've gone into it with the wrong attitude of not respecting the distance, and I've had to sort of pull my head in and realize that a 5K can knock you down. And then I've had times where I've been through a number of health journeys in the last few years because I've smashed the crap out of my body, and had points where I haven't been able to lift my head off the pillow to crawl to the toilet, So I know the full gambit of what it is to run hundreds of kilometers and what it is to not be able to make the toilet,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's a really different perspective on what we do, because then you start to understand, like, the human body is, we have this incredible mind and this incredible body that we can do amazing things with. And then to be put into certain health situations where you've had nothing has given me a real compassion for people with chronic pain, or people that are going through illnesses or disabilities, and not taking that for granted, that we have our health and that we have, so this has been that sort of leads on to a story. Do you mind if I share about my mum's story at this point?
let me, yes, but let's pause for a second, because I wanted to just share something to put a pin in what you were just talking about. In the SEALs, we said that there is no such thing as failure. There is winning or success, mission success, and there's learning.
Mm-hmm.
Right? But there's no failure. Failure is not an option.
Yeah.
And that was so profound of a lesson that is so valuable for everybody, because everybody thinks that if things don't work out according to their expectations, that they failed or they're a failure. And that's just total bullshit, right? First of all, expectations, tend to lead to problems themselves, right? So, we always used to say it's the journey, not the destination in our training. So it really is the journey. And if you hit the finish line, great, that's good. But if you expect to hit the finish line and maybe it's not your day, or maybe your body, has a failure because of some conditions you weren't aware of, or any number of things that could go wrong, and suddenly you just say that's a failure because you didn't meet your expectations of crossing the finish line, then it's actually doing violence to yourself, right? It's negative, and you're weakening your overall psychosomatic physical structure by taking on that negative construct. So no, there is no failure. There's winning or success, and there's learning and growth, and both of them, can coexist, right, in the same moments, right, in the same. So you can take that learning from not completing an event like you did as a win or as a success, and it's all positive, and you continue that growth. You don't stop yourself in your tracks.
It's so powerful, because a lot of people are so down, especially, really go-getter type A personalities that are just, I have to win at all costs. I have to finish at all costs. Right. And then you don't, and you beat yourself up instead of going, hang on a minute, I learned this, this, and this on this journey. And I created this change, and I found out a new thing. You know, I collapsed because I didn't, I don't know, take the right electrolytes or whatever the case was. There's always a variable. Like, and this is the way life is. Like, you can plan everything, and
no plan survives contact
with the enemy. Exactly. And then shit's got to come at you. And this is where learning that that's life, and this is the ebbs and flows, and being flexible and adaptable, and being like water and being like a reed in the wind, rather than being that I failed tree that says, no, I'm solid and I shouldn't have failed and therefore I'm useless, which was my construct for many, many years. And now I realize, when I look back on the times when I failed, and you know, it sounds cliche, but those were greatest learnings and things that really helped me in life. Right. And this is where resilience comes in, because then you've learned, you've failed, you've succeeded, you've gotten back up again, and it's the getting back up again that's the key. You know, it's the I'm going to try again, or I'm going to do something slightly different and go in a different direction, or I'm going to change what I'm doing. But it's always learning, and it's always developing. And so then nothing becomes a failure. It becomes either, like you say, a win or a learning curve. And it's not always pleasant. No, like, it's not pleasant to fail at the goal that you set and you think you've failed. But when you look at it with retrospect, and when you have the wisdom of being a little bit older, you know, because we're both north of 50, you get to look back and you see what that journey was, what it was really about. And then you can have that sort of, you know, perspective. And looking back, everything's a hell of a lot easier than looking forward.
That's right. Again, all these funny, you're like, you would have been a great Navy SEAL, because that speaks to the other mantra we had, is that the only easy day was yesterday. Because yesterday sure looks easy today, but yesterday it was a pain in the ass, you know?
Yeah.
And today's
I
already
certainly wouldn't want to go through some of the stuff I've already been through. Like, would you want to go through buds again?
No, but you know,
not.
No.
No.
Not unless I had to.